The Whitmore family had always been passionate about board games. Every Friday evening, their cozy living room transformed into a battlefield of strategy, luck, and laughter. Margaret Whitmore, a librarian with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, would carefully arrange their extensive collection on the mahogany coffee table. Her husband David, a mild-mannered accountant with an unexpected competitive streak, would rub his hands together in anticipation. Their twin daughters, 16-year-old Emma and Lily, despite their vastly different personalities, shared their parents' enthusiasm for game night. Emma was the analytical one, methodical, strategic, always thinking 3 moves ahead. She excelled at chess and complex strategy games that required patience and planning. Lily, on the other hand, was spontaneous and intuitive, preferring games that relied on quick thinking and bold risks. Despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, they made formidable opponents. On this particular Friday in October, as autumn rain drummed against the windows of their Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts, the family gathered around their usual gaming spot. The fireplace crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows across the room filled with towering bookshelves and family photographs. "What shall it be tonight?" Margaret asked, surveying their collection. "Monopoly? Scrabble? Perhaps something more challenging? How about that new strategy game we bought last month?" David suggested, but Emma shook her head. "We've played that 3 times already, Dad. I am in the mood for something different." Lily bounced in her chair. "Something adventurous. Something we've never tried before." Margaret smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Well, there might be something." She paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I found an old game at the library's book sale yesterday. It was mixed in with some donated items from the old Henderson estate. I meant to examine it properly, but I've been so busy." She rose and walked to a cabinet in the corner, returning with a wooden box that looked ancient and weathered. The wood was dark with age, carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the fireplace's flickering light. Brass corners and a curious lock that appeared to be shaped like an hourglass adorned the mysterious container. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, her analytical mind immediately drawn to the craftsmanship and strange markings. "And mysterious," Lily added, practically vibrating with excitement. "What's it called?" Margaret turned the box over carefully. On the bottom, burned into the wood in elegant script, were the words, "Mundus Parallelus, a journey beyond the veil." "Mundus Parallelus," David read aloud, his rusty Latin kicking in. "Parallel world," roughly translated. The lock clicked open at his words, as if responding to the Latin pronunciation. The family exchanged surprised glances. "That's odd," Margaret murmured, but Lily was already reaching for the lid. "Don't touch it yet," Emma cautioned, her scientific mind warring with curiosity. "We should research it first. These old games sometimes have historical significance, or they could be valuable." But Lily's fingers were already tracing the edge of the box. "Oh, come on, Em. Live a little. It's just a board game." As she lifted the lid, a soft, melodious humming filled the air, like distant wind chimes mixed with whispered voices. The sound was so faint that each family member wondered if they were imagining it. Inside the box, nestled in what appeared to be dark blue velvet that seemed to contain tiny, twinkling stars, lay the most beautiful game board any of them had ever seen. It was circular, about 2 feet in diameter, made of what looked like polished obsidian with silver inlay. The board was divided into concentric circles, each containing different landscapes, forests, mountains, oceans, deserts, and cities that seemed to belong to no earthly civilization. At the center of the board sat a crystal sphere, no larger than a marble, that pulsed with an inner light that shifted through all the colors of the spectrum. Around the board's edge were 4 starting positions, each marked with a different symbol: a tree, a wave, a flame, and a star. "It's gorgeous," Margaret whispered, her librarian's instincts telling her this was something extraordinary. Nestled beside the board were 4 plain pieces, each carved from a different stone: emerald, sapphire, ruby, and what appeared to be diamond. There was also a set of dice unlike any they'd seen before. Instead of dots, each face contained tiny, intricate symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Finally, there was a leather-bound instruction book, its pages yellowed with age. Emma carefully lifted it, noting how the leather felt worn to the touch. "Welcome, brave travelers, to a realm where reality bends and adventure awaits," she read aloud from the first page. Mundus Parallelus is not merely a game, but a gateway. 4 players must embark on a journey through parallel dimensions, collecting the elements of reality before the convergence occurs. Elements of reality? David questioned, his practical mind struggling with the fantastical language. Emma continued reading. Each player chooses a realm guardian: earth, water, fire, or air. Your journey will take you through 7 parallel worlds, each more wondrous and dangerous than the last. But beware! The game chooses its own timeline, and once begun, it must be completed. The fate of both worlds hangs in the balance. Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement. Both worlds? Do you think it means this world and the game world? It's just thematic language, Emma said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Games often use dramatic phrasing to create atmosphere. Margaret ran her fingers along the board's edge, marveling at how smooth and warm it felt. The craftsmanship is incredible. This must have taken someone years to create. David picked up the ruby playing piece, surprised by its weight and the way it seemed to pulse with warmth. These stones feel real. This isn't costume jewelry. Should we play it? Lily asked, barely containing her enthusiasm. Emma hesitated. Something about the game felt different from their usual Friday night entertainment. The way the lock had opened at David's Latin pronunciation, the strange humming sound, the warmth of the pieces, it all felt too real, too alive. But Margaret was already setting the board in the center of the coffee table. It's just a game, sweetheart. And we are the Whitmore family, we never back down from a gaming challenge. Each family member was drawn to a different piece. Margaret felt inexplicably connected to the Emerald Earth Guardian, while David found himself drawn to the Sapphire Water Guardian. Emma, despite her cautious nature, was fascinated by the Diamond Air Guardian, and Lily immediately claimed the Ruby Fire Guardian. As they each placed their pieces on their chosen starting positions, the crystal sphere in the center of the board began to glow more brightly. The room seemed to darken around them, as if the game board were drawing in all available light. Did anyone else notice the temperature drop? David asked, but his voice sounded distant, muffled. The symbols on the dice began to glow more intensely, and Emma could swear she saw tiny scenes playing out within each symbol. Miniature forests swaying in unfelt breezes, tiny oceans with crashing waves, flames that danced without consuming anything, and stars that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Lily reached for the dice with trembling fingers. The instructions say the youngest player goes first, she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and something that might have been fear. As her fingers closed around the dice, the humming sound grew louder, more complex, until it sounded like a full orchestra playing in some distant realm. The board's surface began to shimmer, the landscapes within each ring appearing to move and shift like living dioramas. Maybe we should stop, Emma said, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. It's too late, Margaret replied, though she hadn't meant to speak. The words had simply appeared in her mind and spilled from her lips. Lily rolled the dice. The moment the dice left her hands, the world around them began to dissolve. The comfortable living room with its familiar furniture and family photos started to fade like mist. The fire in the fireplace flickered and went out, but they weren't plunged into darkness. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by the soft, ethereal glow emanating from the game board, which had somehow grown larger, or perhaps they had grown smaller. The last thing Emma remembered clearly was the sound of her own voice, scientific and logical even in the face of the impossible. I don't think this is just a board game. And then they were falling, or flying, or perhaps simply being, in a space between spaces, a time between times, where the only constant was the 4 glowing game pieces that had somehow become part of them, and the crystal sphere that pulsed like a heart at the center of everything. The Whitmore family's greatest adventure was about to begin. The sensation of falling ended as abruptly as it had begun. One moment the Whitmores were tumbling through a kaleidoscope of swirling colors and impossible geometries, and the next they found themselves standing on solid ground in what could only be described as a living fairy tale. Margaret was the first to regain her bearings, her librarian's instinct for cataloging and understanding kicking in immediately. They stood in a vast meadow that stretched to the horizon, but this was no ordinary field. The grass beneath their feet shimmered with an inner light, each blade containing what looked like tiny fiber optic threads that pulsed gently in rhythm with their heartbeats. Flowers the size of dinner plates swayed in a breeze that carried the scent of honey and distant rain, their petals shifting through impossible colors that had no names in their world. "Is everyone all right?" she called out, her voice sounding clearer and more resonant than it ever had before. David stood nearby, blinking rapidly as he tried to process what he was seeing. The accountant in him wanted to find logical explanations, but the evidence of his senses was overwhelming. In the distance, crystalline mountains rose like frozen music against a sky that held 3 moons, each a different phase and color, one silver, one gold, and one that seemed to be made of pure starlight. Emma and Lily helped each other to their feet, both girls staring in wonder at their surroundings. But it was when they looked at each other that they noticed the first major change. "Mom," Emma said slowly, "look at your hands." Margaret raised her hands and gasped. Her skin had a subtle luminescence, and when she concentrated, she could see tiny patterns of light flowing just beneath the surface, like living tattoos made of soft green fire. The patterns resembled growing vines and blooming flowers. David examined his own hands to find similar markings, but his were flowing blue patterns that looked like rivers and ocean currents. Emma's patterns were silver and seemed to move like wind currents or perhaps electrical impulses, while Lily's were golden red, flickering like flames dancing across her skin. "The guardian marks," Lily breathed, remembering the game instructions. "We really are the realm guardians now." As if summoned by her words, a figure approached them across the luminous meadow. It appeared to be a woman, but as she drew closer, they could see she was something far more extraordinary. Her skin was bark brown and seemed to have the texture of smooth tree bark, while her hair flowed like living moss, dotted with tiny flowers that opened and closed with her breathing. Her eyes were the deep green of ancient forests, and when she smiled, her teeth were like polished river stones. "Welcome, guardians," she said, her voice like wind through leaves. "I am Verdania, keeper of the Earth Realm. You have arrived at a crucial time." Margaret stepped forward, her Earth Guardian instincts somehow knowing this being was a friend. "Verdania, we not entirely sure how we got here or what we supposed to do." Verdania's laugh was like birds singing at dawn. "Few travelers ever are, dear Earth Mother. But the game has chosen you, and the game is never wrong. Come, walk with me, and I will explain what you need to know." As they followed Verdania across the meadow, the landscape around them continued to shift and surprise them. Trees grew in perfect spirals, their trunks twisted like DNA helixes, their leaves chiming softly in harmonious melodies when the wind touched them. Streams flowed uphill in defiance of gravity, their waters crystal clear and filled with fish that seemed to be made of living light. "This is the first realm," Verdania explained as they walked, "the realm of growing things. It is where life begins and where the first element of reality can be found, the seed of infinite potential." "Element of reality?" David questioned, his practical mind still struggling to accept what was happening. "Reality, as you understand it in your world, is maintained by 4 fundamental elements," Verdania replied. "The seed of infinite potential represents the power of growth and creation. The tide of eternal flow represents the power of change and adaptation. The flame of endless passion represents the power of transformation and will. And the wind of infinite possibility represents the power of thought and dreams." Emma, ever the strategist, was already thinking ahead. "And we need to collect all 4 to complete the game? To save both worlds," Verdania corrected gently. "Your world and ours exist in delicate balance. But that balance has been disrupted. The convergence approaches, a time when the barriers between all parallel worlds will collapse unless the elements are gathered and used to restore the cosmic harmony." They had reached what appeared to be the heart of the meadow, where an enormous tree grew from a raised hill. The tree was unlike anything they had ever imagined. Its trunk was easily 50 feet in diameter, its bark a rich chocolate brown that seemed to glow from within. Its branches stretched impossibly high and wide, creating a canopy that seemed to touch the 3 moons above. But most remarkable of all, hanging from the central branch like a fruit, was a sphere of pure golden light about the size of a baseball. "The seed of infinite potential," Verdania announced. "But be warned, the elements do not give themselves freely. Each guardian must prove their worth through trials that test not just their courage, but their understanding of the power they represent. As she spoke, the ground around the great tree began to shift and change. What had been a peaceful hill moments before transformed into a challenging landscape. Thorny vines erupted from the earth, creating a maze between the guardians and the tree. Flowers that had seemed beautiful and harmless moments before revealed rows of sharp teeth and began snapping at anything that moved nearby. The trial of growth, Verdania explained. Margaret, as the Earth Guardian, you must lead your family through this maze. But remember, in this realm, force and destruction lead only to failure. You must work with nature, not against it. Margaret looked at the thorny maze with growing understanding. Her Earth Guardian instincts were telling her something important. She knelt down and placed her hands on the glowing grass, feeling the life force flowing through it. It's not just about getting through, she murmured. It's about understanding what growth really means. She stood and turned to her family. Hold hands. Form a chain. And whatever happens, remember that we're not trying to conquer this maze. We're trying to join it. As they linked hands, Margaret felt the power of her guardian mark flowing stronger. She approached the first wall of thorns and, instead of looking for a way around or through it, she began to hum softly. A lullaby she had sung to the twins when they were babies. The thorns responded immediately, their sharp points retracting and their vines beginning to sway gently to her melody. A path opened before them, not because the thorns moved away, but because they rearranged themselves into an archway. It's working, Lily exclaimed, her fire guardian marks flaring brighter with excitement. But as they progressed deeper into the maze, the challenges became more complex. They encountered flowers that would only allow them to pass if David sang to them in harmony with Margaret's humming. His water guardian instincts guided him to create fluid, flowing melodies that complemented his wife's earthier tones. Emma faced her own challenge when they reached a section where the path was blocked by floating spores that created an impenetrable fog. Her air guardian abilities allowed her to understand the wind patterns in the maze, and by moving in sync with the air currents, she could guide the family through the fog without disturbing the delicate ecosystem. Lily's test came when they encountered a section where the maze was withering and dying. Her fire guardian powers weren't about destruction, she realized, but about the warmth and energy that promotes growth. By channeling her inner fire into gentle warmth rather than consuming flame, she was able to revitalize the dying plants and open the final path to the great tree. But their greatest challenge awaited them at the tree itself. As they approached the glowing seed of infinite potential, the air around them began to shimmer, and suddenly they were no longer alone. 4 shadowy figures materialized from the darkness between the tree's roots. They were perfect dark mirrors of the Whitmore family, a shadow Margaret with thorns for hair, a shadow David whose body seemed to be made of stagnant water, a shadow Emma whose form flickered like a broken television signal, and a shadow Lily who burned with cold, consuming fire. The shadow guardians, Verdania's voice whispered from somewhere far away. They represent the destructive potential of each element. To claim the seed, you must not defeat them, you must integrate them. For growth without decay, creation without destruction, leads only to stagnation. Margaret understood first. These weren't enemies to be fought, but aspects of themselves that needed to be acknowledged and balanced. She approached her shadow self and, instead of recoiling from the thorny appearance, embraced her. I accept that growth sometimes requires pruning, she said aloud. I accept that sometimes the old must make way for the new. Her shadow self smiled and dissolved into sparkles of dark light that flowed into Margaret's guardian marks, making them more complex and complete. Following her lead, David embraced his shadow, accepting that water could be both life-giving and destructive. Emma acknowledged that air could be both inspiring breath and devastating storm. And Lily accepted that fire was both creative warmth and consuming transformation. As the last shadow dissolved, the seed of infinite potential gently detached from the great tree and floated down into Margaret's outstretched hands. The moment she touched it, knowledge flooded through all 4 guardians. They understood now that they were part of something much larger than a simple game. They were participants in a cosmic balance that affected not just their world and this parallel realm, but countless others. The meadow around them began to fade as Verdania reappeared, smiling with approval. You have passed the first trial and claimed the first element, she said. But 3 more await you, each more challenging than the last. Are you prepared to continue? Without hesitation, all 4 family members nodded. They had changed, they realized. The trials hadn't just tested them. They had awakened something within them, something that had perhaps always been there but had never been called upon. The world dissolved around them once again, but this time they weren't falling. They were traveling, moving through the space between spaces toward their next destination. The seed of infinite potential pulsed gently in Margaret's hands, and they all felt its power. The power to grow, to create, to bring new things into being. But they also felt something else. A growing darkness at the edge of perception. A shadow that seemed to be pursuing them through the dimensional barriers. The convergence was approaching, and somewhere in the space between worlds, something that definitely didn't want them to succeed was beginning to take notice of their progress. The transition between realms felt different this time. Instead of the gentle dissolution they had experienced before, the Whitmores found themselves pulled through what felt like a vast underwater current, their bodies moving with fluid grace through liquid light. When they finally emerged, they gasped collectively, not for air, but at the breathtaking sight before them. They stood on what appeared to be a platform of crystallized water, suspended high above an infinite ocean that stretched to every horizon. The water below wasn't the familiar blue of Earth's seas, but a constantly shifting spectrum of colors, deep purples that faded to brilliant silvers, emerald greens that melted into golden yellows, and sapphire blues that seemed to contain entire galaxies of stars. Above them, instead of sky, was more ocean, an inverted sea that hung like a liquid ceiling, complete with fish swimming in lazy circles and coral formations that grew downward like chandeliers. Occasionally, drops of this upper ocean would fall like rain, but instead of making them wet, each droplet that touched them filled them with brief flashes of emotion, joy, sorrow, wonder, fear, as if the water carried the memories of everyone who had ever touched it. "Welcome to the realm of tides," a voice said from behind them. They turned to see a figure rising from the crystalline platform as if emerging from beneath its surface. Like Verdania had been a creature of earth and growing things, this being was clearly born of water. His form seemed to shift constantly between liquid and solid, sometimes appearing as a tall man with flowing blue-green hair, other times as a column of living water with eyes like tidal pools. When he moved, small waves rippled outward from his feet. "I am Aquarius," he said, his voice like waves breaking on distant shores. "Guardian of the water realm, keeper of the tides of change. You have done well to reach this place, but greater challenges await you here." David stepped forward, his water guardian marks pulsing more brightly in response to the realm's energy. "The second element, the tide of eternal flow. What must we do to prove ourselves worthy?" Aquarius smiled, and when he did, tiny whirlpools appeared at the corners of his mouth. "In the Earth realm, you learned that growth requires balance. Here, you must understand that adaptation requires surrender. The water teaches us that the strongest force is often the gentlest, and that true power comes not from resistance, but from flowing around obstacles." As he spoke, the platform beneath them began to expand, growing outward into a complex structure of bridges, pools, and waterways. The Whitmores found themselves standing at the beginning of what looked like an elaborate water temple, with channels and streams flowing in impossible directions. Some upward, some in spirals, some seeming to flow backward. "The trial of adaptation," Aquarius announced. "Each of you must reach the center of the temple, where the tide of eternal flow waits. But you cannot walk there, you must become one with the water, allow it to carry you. And you must do so while facing the deepest currents of your own emotions." Margaret, still holding the seed of infinite potential, looked uncertainly at the flowing water. "How do we become one with water?" "The same way you became one with the earth," Emma said, her analytical mind making connections. "We don't fight it, we join it." Lily bounced on her toes, her fire guardian marks creating small wisps of steam where they touched the humid air. "But I am fire. Water is supposed to be my opposite." "No," David said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's the old way of thinking. Fire and water aren't opposites, they're partners in the cycle of change. Steam, clouds, rain, rivers flowing to the sea, evaporation, and back to clouds again." Aquarius nodded approvingly. "The water guardian speaks wisdom. Now, are you ready to begin?" Without waiting for an answer, he gestured, and the water in the nearest channel began to glow with inviting warmth. Margaret approached first, her Earth Guardian instincts telling her to trust in natural cycles. As she stepped into the water, she felt her body changing, not dissolving, but becoming more fluid, more adaptable. The water carried her gently forward, and she found that by relaxing and letting go of her need to control the situation, she could influence the current's direction with her thoughts and emotions. When she felt calm and centered, the water flowed smoothly. When doubt crept in, the current became turbulent. David followed his wife into the flow, and his transformation was even more dramatic. His water guardian nature allowed him to merge almost completely with the current, becoming a consciousness within the flowing stream. But with this merger came an overwhelming flood of emotions, not just his own, but the collective emotional memory of the water itself. He experienced the joy of a child's first swim, the sorrow of tears shed in loneliness, the passion of lovers meeting by moonlit lakes, the fear of storms at sea. Every drop of water in this realm carried the emotional imprint of everyone it had ever touched, and David had to learn to flow with these feelings without being overwhelmed by them. Emma's approach was characteristically methodical. As the air guardian, she studied the flow patterns before entering the water, using her connection to air to understand how the currents moved. But when she finally stepped in, she discovered that too much analysis created resistance. The water wouldn't carry her forward until she learned to balance her analytical nature with intuitive trust. Her trial became about learning to feel her way through problems instead of always thinking through them. As she relaxed her mental grip, she found herself moving through the temple's channels with surprising grace, her air guardian abilities allowing her to read the emotional currents as easily as wind patterns. Lily's trial was the most dramatic. As soon as her feet touched the water, steam began to rise around her in great billowing clouds. Her fire guardian nature seemed to be in direct conflict with the water realm. But Aquarius's voice echoed through the temple. Remember, young fire guardian, you are not meant to fight the water. You are meant to dance with it. Slowly, Lily began to understand. Instead of trying to suppress her fire nature or seeing it as incompatible with water, she learned to use it in harmony. Her heat turned the water into steam, which carried her upward through vertical channels that would have been impossible to navigate otherwise. Her passion warmed the emotional currents, bringing comfort to the sorrowful memories and intensifying the joyful ones. As each family member progressed through their individual channels, the temple around them began to reveal its true nature. It wasn't just a structure, it was a living representation of the emotional and spiritual connections between all beings. The water carried not just physical movement, but understanding, empathy, and the deep knowledge that all life is connected through the flowing currents of existence. But their greatest challenge still awaited them at the temple's heart. When they finally converged in the central chamber, they found themselves in a spherical room made entirely of flowing water. Suspended in the center, like a liquid jewel, was the tide of eternal flow, a sphere of ever-changing water that contained within it every possible shade of blue, every pattern of wave and current that had ever existed. But between them and the element stood four figures that made their hearts clench with recognition and pain. These weren't shadow versions of themselves, but water-formed manifestations of their deepest regrets and fears. Shadow Margaret, made of stagnant, lifeless water, represented her fear of being boring, of not being adventurous enough for her family. Shadow David, formed from turbulent, chaotic currents, embodied his terror of losing control and failing to provide stability for his loved ones. Shadow Emma, created from frozen ice, reflected her fear that her analytical nature made her cold and unable to connect emotionally with others. And Shadow Lily, formed from scalding steam, represented her deepest worry that her impulsiveness would someday hurt the people she loved most. The trial of emotional honesty, Aquarius's voice echoed through the chamber. You cannot claim the tide of eternal flow until you have faced the currents of your own hearts with complete honesty. Unlike in the Earth realm, where they had embraced their shadow selves, this trial required something different. They had to dive deeper, to understand not just what their shadows represented, but why those fears had power over them. Margaret approached her stagnant shadow and spoke with trembling honesty. I've spent so much of my life being the responsible one, the stable one, that I've forgotten how to take risks. I am afraid that my children will see me as just ordinary. Her shadow replied in a voice like dead water. You are ordinary. You're just a librarian. David is the provider, Emma is the brilliant one, Lily is the exciting one. What special thing do you bring to this family? The words hit like physical blows, but Margaret forced herself to feel them fully, to let the pain wash through her like a cleansing tide. And in doing so, she found her answer. I bring love, she said simply. I bring the willingness to grow, to learn, to change. I bring the courage to step into magic when it calls. That's not ordinary. That's the most extraordinary thing of all. Her shadow smiled and dissolved into clear, flowing water that merged with Margaret's guardian marks. David faced his chaotic shadow with equal courage. I am terrified that I am not strong enough to protect my family from what's coming. They built my whole identity around being stable and reliable, but this situation is beyond anything I know how to handle. His shadow churned with violent currents. You right to be afraid. You just an accountant. What do you know about cosmic forces and parallel worlds? You fail them when they need you most. David breathed deeply, letting the fear flow through him without resistance. Maybe I don't know about cosmic forces. But I know about love. I know about commitment. I know about adapting to new challenges because my family is worth it. That's not weakness. That's the strongest current of all. His shadow calmed and flowed into him like a peaceful river. Emma's frozen shadow confronted her with her deepest insecurity. You think too much and feel too little. You going to analyze your family's love away, reduce it to logic and equations until there's nothing left. Maybe I do think too much sometimes, Emma admitted, allowing tears to fall freely. But thinking deeply is how I show love. Every strategy I plan, every detail I analyze, it's because I care so much that I want to get everything right. My thoughts are full of love. They just love expressed differently. Her ice shadow melted into warm, embracing water. Finally, Lily faced her scalding shadow, who hissed with superheated steam. Your impulsiveness is going to get everyone hurt. You leap without looking, act without thinking. You dangerous to the people you love. Lily's fire flared brighter as she felt the accusation's sting, but then she breathed deep and let her flames settle to a warm glow. Yes, I am impulsive. But impulse isn't always bad. Sometimes it's intuition. Sometimes it's courage. Sometimes it's the spark that ignites possibility. I am learning to balance my fire with wisdom, but I want to apologize for burning bright. Her steam shadow cooled and flowed into her like a gentle, warm rain. The realm around them shifted, and suddenly they were not in a place of fire, but in a realm of pure sky. There was no ground beneath them, only endless open air through which they somehow stood as if on solid earth. Clouds in impossible formations drifted around them, some shaped like castles, others like entire cities, and still others like fantastic creatures from dreams. A figure approached them through the air, walking on wind as if it were stone. This being appeared to be made of condensed air itself, sometimes solid and visible, other times translucent as morning mist. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through caverns, carrying echoes of every whispered secret and every proclaimed truth. I am Zephyr, master of the eternal wind, guardian of thought and dream and infinite possibility. The shadow between worlds has forced us to combine our trials, for time grows short. You must claim both remaining elements simultaneously, or risk losing everything you have fought for. Emma stepped forward, her air guardian marks creating small whirlwinds around her feet. What do you mean, simultaneously? The fire and air elements are intrinsically linked, Zephyr explained. Passion without freedom becomes obsession. Freedom without passion becomes emptiness. You must prove that you understand both the power of transformation and the wisdom of possibility. As he spoke, the combined fire-air realm around them revealed its true nature. They stood at the center of a vast spiral that stretched both up and down to infinity. The spiral was made of alternating bands of fire and air, and suspended at various points along its length were what looked like doorways or portals, each one showing a different scene. The trial of ultimate choice, Ignitia and Zephyr spoke in unison, their voices creating harmonies of flame and wind. Each portal shows a possible future, for your family, for your world, for all the worlds that exist in the cosmic dance of reality. You must choose which future you will fight to create, knowing that your choice will determine the fate of countless lives. Margaret felt the weight of the seed of infinite potential in her hands grow heavier, while David experienced the tide of eternal flow becoming more turbulent. The elements they had already claimed were responding to the cosmic forces at work here. But how do we choose? Margaret asked. How can we make a decision that affects so many people we don't even know? You choose with your hearts, came a new voice, and they turned to see a figure approaching who made them all gasp in recognition and confusion. It was another version of themselves, but not shadow versions this time. This was the Whitmore family as they might have been if they had never found the game, if they had continued their quiet, ordinary lives. Ordinary Margaret looked tired and slightly bitter, as if she had given up on adventure forever. Ordinary David appeared stressed and worn down by years of financial worry. Ordinary Emma seemed cold and calculating, having learned to suppress all emotion in favor of pure logic. And ordinary Lily looked defeated, her natural fire dimmed to barely glowing embers. We are the lives you gave up when you chose to play the game, ordinary Margaret said sadly. Safe lives. Predictable lives. Lives without risk or magic or cosmic responsibility. We could still be yours, ordinary David added. Just walk away. Go home. Pretend none of this ever happened. Live quietly and safely and leave the fate of multiple worlds to someone else. The temptation was real and powerful. Emma found herself thinking about her college applications, her carefully planned future. David thought about his accounting practice, his retirement plans, his comfortable routines. Margaret thought about her library, her quiet books, her simple pleasures. And Lily thought about normal teenage problems, school dances and first dates and choosing colleges, instead of cosmic responsibility. But then they looked at each other, really looked, and saw what they had become. Margaret's eyes now held depths of wisdom and courage she had never possessed before. David's shoulders carried strength he had never known he had. Emma's face showed a perfect balance of thought and feeling that made her more beautiful than mere logic ever could. And Lily blazed with a fire that was both passionate and controlled, wild and wise. No, Margaret said quietly, and her voice carried the authority of the Earth Guardian she had become. We're not the same people who sat down to play a board game. We've grown. We've become who we were always meant to be. The ordinary versions of themselves smiled sadly and faded away like morning mist. Now they faced the portals, each one showing a different possible future. In one, they saw their own world saved but all the parallel worlds destroyed. In another, they saw the parallel worlds saved but their own Earth consumed by the shadow between worlds. A third showed all worlds saved but their family scattered across different realities, never to be reunited. But Emma, her air guardian intuition now perfectly balanced with her analytical mind, noticed something the others had missed. There's another portal, she said, pointing to a space between the others that seemed empty. It's not showing us anything because it represents the future we create ourselves. The future that doesn't exist yet because we haven't imagined it into being. Lily's fire guardian passion flared with understanding. We don't choose from existing possibilities. We create a new one. But how? David asked, even as his water guardian instincts told him the answer had to do with flowing around obstacles rather than confronting them directly. Margaret, drawing on her Earth Guardian connection to growth and creation, stepped toward the empty portal. With all four elements working together. Not in sequence but in harmony. She held up the seed of infinite potential, and David raised the tide of eternal flow beside it. The two elements began to resonate, their energies intertwining in spirals of green and blue light. At the same moment, the remaining two elements materialized in response to their harmony. The flame of endless passion appeared in Lily's hands, not as destructive fire, but as warm, creative energy that could transform anything it touched. The wind of infinite possibility manifested around Emma as currents of air that carried every dream and hope that had ever been imagined. Together, Margaret said, and all four family members raised their elements simultaneously. The moment the four elements touched, reality exploded around them. They found themselves standing not in any single realm, but in the space between all realms, a vast void where the shadow between worlds revealed its true form. It was enormous beyond comprehension. A writhing mass of tentacles and darkness that seemed to be made of every nightmare and fear that had ever existed. Its hunger was so intense that it was already beginning to devour the edges of the parallel worlds, consuming entire realities like a cosmic parasite. You cannot stop me, it spoke with a voice like dying stars. I am the entropy that waits at the end of all things. I am the shadow that exists between every moment of light. Your little elements are nothing against the inevitability of ending. But the Whitmores had learned something that the shadow between worlds did not understand. They had learned that true power didn't come from conflict, but from harmony. Not from dominance, but from balance. Margaret stepped forward with the seed of infinite potential. You wrong. Endings aren't the opposite of beginnings, they part of the same cycle. David joined her with the tide of eternal flow. And shadows aren't the opposite of light, they what gives light meaning. Emma moved to stand with them, the wind of infinite possibility swirling around her. You exist because you necessary. But so do we. Finally, Lily completed their formation, the flame of endless passion burning steady and warm in her hands. We not here to destroy you. We here to balance you. They raised the four elements together, not as weapons but as offerings. The combined power of earth, water, air, and fire didn't attack the shadow between worlds. It embraced it, surrounded it, completed it. The shadow writhed and fought, but gradually it began to change. The tentacles of pure darkness became the dark matter that held galaxies together. The consuming hunger became the force that recycled old stars into new ones. The nightmares and fears became the challenges that helped living beings grow stronger and wiser. The convergence wasn't a collision after all, it was a completion. All the parallel worlds didn't crash into each other. They found their proper places in a vast cosmic dance, each one separate but connected, each one contributing its unique beauty to the infinite symphony of existence. As balance was restored, the Whitmores found themselves back in their own living room, sitting around their familiar coffee table. The mysterious game board sat before them, its surface now showing not the strange parallel landscapes they had traveled through, but a peaceful scene of all the worlds in harmony. Did we? Emma started to ask, then stopped as she noticed that her hands still carried the faint silver patterns of her Air Guardian marks. They all still bore the marks of their transformation, though fainter now, like beautiful tattoos that were part of their very beings. More importantly, they could feel the change in themselves, the growth, the balance, the deep understanding of their place in the cosmic order. Margaret carefully closed the game box, but not before reading the final words that had appeared on the inside of the lid. Thank you, brave guardians, for understanding that the greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in helping them find their proper place in the harmony of all things. Outside their windows, the autumn rain continued to fall, but it seemed to sparkle with inner light. Somewhere in the spaces between raindrops, parallel worlds danced in perfect balance, and four ordinary people who had become extraordinary guardians sat together in the warm glow of their fireplace, forever changed by the understanding that magic isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose to become. Same time next week? Lily asked with a grin. Always, Margaret replied, and the whole family laughed, the sound carrying across dimensions and touching every world with the music of love, growth, change, and infinite possibility. The game was complete, but the real adventure, the adventure of being a family that had learned to balance all the elements of existence, was just beginning.